Next up, a very compelling panel discussion entitled Sustainability in ICT and Green Tech. Please welcome the panelists, Emaad Ahmed, Principal Solution Consultant and Network Architecture Transformation Chief Expert, Huawei; Philippe Vogeleer, Global Head Business Development, Vodafone; Grace Najjar, Managing Director, Project Management Institute and Global PMI Head of Energy; Yasir Ahmed, MENA Climate Change and Sustainability Services Leader, EY; Stelios Savvides, CTIO, Vodafone Oman; and Dr. Linda Kassem, Senior Policy and Legal Advisor, Lead Trade Negotiator; and the moderator, Samar Ibrahim, Associate Director, EY.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everybody's half awake after lunch. Thank you so much for joining the discussion, and it's a pleasure to be with such an esteemed list of individuals for this panel. Today's discussion is more along the lines of understanding the role that ICT plays on the sustainability agenda. Sustainability is nothing new. It's been around for so many years, and there are different ways that we can address this solution, and it's come to the forefront today for many, many reasons. And that's what we're sort of going to dive into a little bit into this panel today. But what I first want to do is address a little bit the elephant in the room, which is the realization that the sector itself, the ICT sector, actually has work to do within itself. So there is an anticipation that by 2030, 23% of GHG emissions will be coming from the ICT sector. This being from machinery, from the devices, from the different energy consumptions that we see in the data centers, and of course the e-waste. But that does not mean that ICT should not be looked at as a whole, and looking at the broader spectrum of how is it an enabler for other sectors to take action and to really drive this sustainability agenda that we see. A lot of this is actually starting to take form in Europe. So you see, for example, in France, you have a clause that was added in January 2021 that said repairability needs to be embedded into the technologies that were there. So there is movement. It's just a matter of which direction do you want to take it in. It's also important to recognize that sustainability contains three factors: the economic, the social, and the environmental, which on today's panel, we're going to touch on all three of them. So I'd like to, again, welcome the panel. They were introduced earlier, so in the interest of saving time, I won't reintroduce them. But maybe we start a deep dive with the first question. Yasir, why now? Why do we talk about sustainability and the ICT role that it has in this change? Please.
Sure. Thank you, Samar. And a very warm welcome to everyone. Quick introduction. My name is Yasir Ahmed. I lead the sustainability practice for Ernst & Young, EY in the MENA region. And we have been working quite closely with the telecom and the ICT sector in terms of setting and helping the sustainability or the ESG agenda, because the rehashed term of sustainability now stands as ESG, which stands for environment, social, and governance. So to answer to your question, Samar, why now? I think if you look at it, the global ecosystem across all the sectors, not only the ICT or the telecom, you have that movement towards embracing of the ESG and the climate-related targets. If I really look at what has changed in the last 2 years and why this has suddenly become a very compelling agenda for all the stakeholders, I think so I would put the first, I would say the priority on the capital markets and the investors. In the last 2 years, we have seen that the capital markets have really signed up to the concept of ESG and linked that into the lending process. So globally, when we see the total asset under management, under responsible investment, which loosely means that any investment which you can avail of, but provided you need to showcase your sustainability credentials, it has more than doubled. And now it stands at somewhere around $45 trillion and increasing. In fact, there was a study by Bloomberg which said that by 2025, 1 in every third dollar in the world will be green in color, which basically means to say that, for 1/3 of the global capital market money movement will be linked to ESG. So I think that's number one, which we see that there is a lot more seriousness in terms of embracing the sustainability or the ESG thing within the ICT and, of course, more specifically on the telecom sector. The second one I would say is on the commitments, both from the businesses plus also from the country's side. We are sitting right now in the MENA region. UAE has committed to net zero 2050. You have Saudi, which is committed to 2060. You have most other countries within the MENA region, if they have not gone ahead with those specific year commitment, but they have rolled out their own plans with respect to the decarbonization agenda. Now, when a country takes a commitment, it flows down to different sectors, and by default, either by incentivization or by a push, it gets translated. So we can see that now, right, and across the sectors and more specifically for the ICT sector. I think, again, similar to the global businesses, they have all set out those ambitious net zero targets. And I just want to underline for the audience that the net zero target is not only for my own limited operations. Now we are seeing that what we call as the scope 3 emissions, they get included. And if we are looking at those global tie-ups, which we are, as the region is opening up and we are looking at making it more mainstream, along with the business package comes the ESG package. And therefore, there is a lot of pressure to showcase those targets and KPIs and maturity in the operation if we want to sit across the table with the players we want to have those partnerships with. Of course, there are many other reasons. I mean, other than the business sign-ups and all, consumers, much contrary to what we all expect, there is a growing trend within the MENA region as well in terms of the consumer consciousness on the decisions that they make while the buying behavior and so much like. We had an EY survey actually, and we looked at the MENA cut for that survey, and was pleasantly surprised, and I use this word pleasantly surprised because one could see that especially amongst the millennials, there is a very growing realization in terms of the impact of sustainability in the buying behavior.
If
so I think,
sorry,
yeah. So, I mean, I think these are, I can, go with much more metrics and much more, pointers around why is it really taking shape. But to answer to your question, why now, I would probably pick up these 3-4 reasons as the primer ones as to why suddenly you see that seriousness in the sector.
Perfect, which is, I want to take one of those, which is what you're talking about as country commitments. And I want to kind of direct the question across to you, Philippe, wherein we have these commitments, there's net zero, but a lot of the enabling factors for this net zero is looking at the actual technologies, the trends that are coming in, that are enabling sustainability to come to fruition. So if you can touch a little bit into what do you see as trends within the sustainability ICT aspect, please.
So I think there are 3 places where we can make a difference as an ICT industry, really, in those commitments. The first one is to try to frame the debate, really, which is you hear lots of data points. If you think about it, it has been said all day here today, we have this data, or we manage this data one way or another with partners. I think we have a specific responsibility to sanitize this data and to use it to the best purpose. So, for instance, to go and explain to states what these data mean for them. Take a very practical example. I mean, I always find it bizarre, if not shocking, that everybody talks about this 1.5 to 2 degrees more. It means nothing. I mean, if you talk to me or any of the panelists probably, or any of you, about, things might increase by a degree, we might not be super tempted to do something because it doesn't mean much. However, if you look at the latest research, which is seen by our systems, which is developed, the latest research says that because the Earth is 70% water, the increase of temperature of 1.5 to 2 degrees overall means 10 to 15 degrees on land. Now, if you go and explain to any of us in this room, specifically here in Dubai, that we might be having an increase of the average temperature of 15 degrees, then all of a sudden it's a very different debate.
Yeah.
So I think first point is really to frame this. The second part is, let's face it, as you mentioned, we are representing a significant chunk of the problem. And there is nothing we can do about it. We grow. That being said, we can be best in class. When I look, and I'm not going to venture into technicalities because my colleague he would shoot me immediately, but if you look at the efficiencies that you see, the average network data point or point of transfer, if you want, has minimized massively. Today, the latest stats of Vodafone are that we currently transmit about 15 times more data than 5 years ago. And we don't consume more energy for it. Yes. And so that's fascinating, because if we had not moved at an accelerated pace to 4G and 5G, we would have increased our pollution massively. Then there is a second internal aspect that nobody bizarrely ever talks about, but I think we should, which is waste. You know, at the end of the day, climate change is a lot to do with emissions, but also with what we do with what we have. And when you look at that, I think it's 72%, if I remember well, that of all the kit that we use, produce, etc., is not recycled.
Yes.
Well, that's a massive problem. So, you know, I'll give you a simple example. Vodafone decided a couple of years back, when we committed to net zero, that we would reduce our waste. And we looked at where's the waste. And so, you know, consumption, it's very easy. It's your antennas, your data centers, etc. Your waste was a lot in the SIM cards. Not in the SIM cards themselves, but in the packaging around it. Lots of plastic. So by just reducing the plastic around them, we reduced our waste by, I think, 70% of the total plastic consumption of the company went down. So there are many, many things we can do which are relatively simple, if you really point out, to figure out what you need to do internally, and then you have a better voice with governments. Then the third element is the most landing to your point, which is, of course, you need to tailor the response country by country to the needs of that country. I'll give you an example. I live in the UK. Do you know that we, on average, lose about 30%, 30, of the entire water of the country just because the pipes go bust? Well, since 3 years, we're working with one of our Japanese partners to replace the lines and to put sensors on these lines just to make sure that we save water. Now, of course, you all imagine the UK being very rainy so that we don't have a water problem, but we actually do have a massive water problem because the summer is becoming longer and the rainfall is becoming lesser. So again, very practically, we could go and say, look, this is what we see, this is what we can do about it. And so you can multiply this in pretty much every country. In South Africa, we've just signed a partnership with Eskom, the electricity company. You probably all know that South Africa suffers massively from blackouts because there's not enough energy. So we're building sites with them. At the COP27, we signed a partnership with USAID. Why? Because they have 160,000 medical outposts in Africa. And for each of these outposts, they have a diesel generator. So they end up being one of the big polluters of Africa just because they brought aid in the form of an outpost with a diesel generator. If we can then decide to work together and, for instance, put a solar energy powered antenna just where the medical site is, then all of a sudden you do double whammy. You've eliminated a problem, and you've eliminated the problem of somebody else, and you've improved the country. So it's really, I think, to go into this systematic thing, into look at the data, look what the data tells you, apply it yourself so that you have a voice because you're credible, and then once you do that, go and tackle, no blah, 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 yes, of course, we will contribute. Just go very specific into, this is my issue, I'll tackle this one, and maybe that one, and maybe that one.
Perfectly said. And I think what people miss out on is the fact that there are technologies today, yes, but they all look at the technologies that are to come, which kind of gives them this 2030, 2050, but that's way too aspirational. You can actually start today, and that little caveat is always missed out, so thank you for that. Maybe we draw out a little bit your comment around looking at best in class or best practices, and I turn to you, Stelios, to look at the actual network performance. How do you ensure that green tech creates that efficiency that we're looking for within your own systems?
Yeah. No, thank you, Samar. And great to be here today with you all. I mean, look, we launched Vodafone Oman just under a year ago, okay? We're a greenfield operator, so we were in a great place to really start and do things the way a lot of others are trying to get to, okay? And the reality is sustainability is important because, especially if I focus a bit on the environmental aspect, okay, we see in Oman that we have been hit by unprecedented weather conditions and so on in the last few years, and it's a result of a lot of what's happening on climate change, the increases and so on. Now, we focused on a few things. I won't start from a network perspective first, but one of the things we did was we had an agenda to be super digital from day one.
Okay.
We can have, and the essence of that is our app, is these e-kiosks that we have scattered around the country, and literally we opened with one shop. So our footprint in terms of a retail outlet was one in the country. So again, less space, less electricity, less carbon footprint. When I look at what we did from a network perspective, so we went virtualized cloud from day one, okay? I went in the first day to see our data center that was ready once everything was set up. And the size was a fraction of what I was used to in all other markets that I've worked in. So immediately, again, efficiency, less energy, basically getting much more for more in what we're doing. And then again, with the help of our partners, Huawei, partner in many markets, but Ericsson working with us in Oman, we deployed the latest capability, latest kit to all our sites that enable multi-technology on single equipment, much less usage of energy. So again, carbon footprint reductions. So we have been looking to really deliver and do something much greener. So we consider ourselves green, but we're always constantly thinking what else we can do. One of the areas that I'm now working with our tower company is to see how I can bring solar to some of our sites to really then drive usage. So, you know, let's get it there. Luckily enough, we have quite a lot of sunshine in Oman, so we should be in a good position. And then I think I wanted to touch on one other aspect which is important, and it comes back to the waste that Philippe talked about. This is more one of the group initiatives that I'm sure we will see more and more in the countries, is to really look at what we're doing with handsets and our customers. So bringing in this circular capability that a handset, once it's used, you know, people can get the latest one, but then refurbish, get it to someone else, and really extend that life of the handset. Can be in the same country or somewhere else, but again, massively reduce waste, which is again one of the things that we're seeing.
Actually, a perfect segue to Emaad, your question. So looking at, again, what can be done to minimize this impact, one of the conversations that we're looking at is circularity. Yes. So how do you feel and how do you envision circularity taking shape within the ICT sector?
Actually, you know, when you look at how, you know, I'll be the champion for the industry for a minute. You know, you talked about like how much carbon we are going to be putting into the atmosphere. Let's talk about it from a positive aspect. The GSI report that you were talking about, the same report, the target is that what we have been emitting as an industry in 2015, by 2025, 2030, the target is to keep that number as is. So that really adds up really well, and that then there is a carbon net reduction that is being brought in and been brought in by technologies like 5G. One of the drivers for bringing that reduction is mobility. And when we talk about the circular economy and trying to bring that into the equation, one of the most important aspects that we have to consider is, as an industry, we have to look at everything from material science to how we manufacture, how we even package. I'll give you an example. We ship a lot of radio sites and network equipment to even Vodafone and other opcos across the region. All the packaging is biodegradable. It's recycled wood. And the pallets, just in the last 2 years, during the COVID time, we have reduced the amount of material, raw wood, that goes into those pallets, and that's recycled wood, by the way, by 50%. That's a huge saving on itself. It brings the industry into, you know, gives it a reality check that we are doing something. And then on the equipment side as well, there's a lot of initiatives that have happened. I won't go back too far. You know, the numbers look too good when you go back 10 years, 8 years. But we are in technology. We should be talking about 18 months.
Exactly.
Yeah, we follow the Moore's law. So when you look at it from that aspect, in the last 24 months, let's say end 2019 to the products we have today, net, so the average, not even the net, the average saving in terms of power and footprint, both, is about 2x. So we are doubling the amount of capacity, be it on the radio side, be it on the core side, like the data center example just given. Like, it's shocking, like a couple of racks, your whole core network is up, a couple of racks and your BSS is up. So those kind of things are bringing in, real value, and we are bringing in sustainable growth because of that. And we are playing a very pivotal role in that regard. And we are going away from the era. I am very proud when I look at the new radio sites, especially for Vodafone when I went over, even though it's our competition is providing, but we are trying to, Nomantel and others, our equipment is there. Single site, one site, single pole solution. So you've got and for Vodafone it's 5G only, but for people like Omantel and Ooredoo, they have 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, all on a single radio, single pole.
Wow.
So you're saving on power, you're saving on space. The social impact, having 10 different antennas versus having a single antenna, that really, livens up the space, for the lack of better terms.
Of course.
So that is something that we are really focusing on in terms of the circular economy. And for us in Huawei, we think of it everything as a 3-layer cake. So for us, it's intelligent operations, intelligent network, and then we've got the green side. So when we talk about the overall how we are operating, because at the end of the day, you cannot have a network, and this is something that we have been internally championing, and I took over this initiative, like we are part of a small group, almost a decade ago, we started championing that we need to be more, ecologically aware and start focusing on these aspects. And even on the supply chain side, we have taken some initiatives. There's a standard, it's called IPC 1401 or something, where Huawei was responsible for revising it to take ESG and all these aspects of environmental impacts and these things into those standards. And then on top of it, those 3 layers, when you're talking about from the green operations to the green side to the green network, we are trying to bring in technology like making sure everything is all optical. So we are moving away from, because when you have got, like, if you remember the old days where you had copper at home, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of copper, that's also, you're mining that, you're producing that, we need to get away from those things. So going all optical is that one key aspect in this as well. So we try to make all of these things work together to try to make sure that we can leave a world better from where we started off with. And in this regard, we are trying to do the best we can, and we are trying to take up initiatives. One of the best things that we've done, specifically in developing countries, and I'll end it on that, for the circular economy side, is in terms of sustainability, there's a solution, we call it Rural Star. So it's for underdeveloped areas. And we have taken certain concepts of that and even brought it into our next generation and radio technology as well, where we've got a single antenna which goes from C-band, which is 3.5, to millimeter wave, or whatever you want, on the same HSS software. One click, and you just change to what you need it to be. So those kind of technologies really, help us prolong the life of the product, because we are entering into an era where value proposition has to be in the software rather than replacing and rip and replacing boxes all the time. So I hope that this all gels together and creates an industry, and as an industry, we can champion even beyond telco, even the IT industry, because one thing that always pinches me, I'm more on the telco side, so I can, push a little on the IT side. Like, the biggest thing that hurts me personally is on the data center side, servers. Why do we have a 3-year life cycle? So these kind of things we still need to work on. There's a lot of things that we need to work on, but we are headed in the right direction. We are more aware.
Perfect. And I think what you've heard all today so far is very much looking at the fact that you cannot look at sustainability as a plug-in at random points in time, which brings me to my question to you, Dr. Linda, is where do you see value in actually weaving sustainability into the ICT sector's strategies? When you're talking about strategy, I know this is the area that you've worked in the past, so how do you see that coming to life?
Thank you. In fact, it's out of what we've heard in the morning, especially in the leaders' session, the first panel in the morning, that telecom sector is a game changer. And also sustainability, which is the good news, is that sustainability is within the agenda. With every speaker talked about the sustainability and the importance of sustainability in the agenda of the private sector and even with the public sector. Having said that, I would like to highlight the importance of sustainability and the telecom sector from an international trade perspective. When we talk about international trade, we talk about goods and services. To a certain extent, in the production of certain goods, it happens that the share in cost of production for a product, the services share amounts for sometimes more than 85 or 90% of the cost. If we look at the ICT sector, the share of cost, we see that sometimes it amounts for around 60 or 70%. And that's the importance of the telecom sector in contributing to the economic growth as a whole and contributing to the production of all sectors. Well, during the past year, we all saw how the global data usage has increased tremendously. And this was due to COVID-19 and the pandemic, and where all of it was due to the increase in demand for digital communication. And that has caused to draw the attention on the CO2 emission of the ICT sector. For telecom operators, the issue of sustainability has become an urgency now. And it should be put at the top of their priorities in their agendas. And they have to look at it from two perspectives, from the saving and the new product perspective, and not from the cost perspective per se. The question that the leaders should ask now, what do we want to accomplish? Yeah. And what type of service do we want to provide? And to what level the above objectives can reduce the negative impact on the environment? Such strategies or, corporate policies can be guided by international standards, especially that the pressure now comes not only from the governments due to their commitments, the international commitments, and as mentioned by our colleague now regarding the commitment of UAE to 2050 and the commitment of KSA to 2016, but also from the consumers, because nowadays the consumers has become more aware and they have conscious on the environment we live it. We can tell how much is the impact of climate change on our lives. And here I would like to mention the importance of the Convention of the Climate Change and the Sustainable Digital Transformation Guidance and the strategy of the ITU. And namely, I would like to highlight the recent decision standard or recommendation issued by the ITU, and this was issued in December 5, and it's about enabling the net zero transition, assessing how the use of ICT solutions impact the greenhouse gas emission of other sectors. According to the standard, they introduced methodology, and I advise that you have a look at it and abide with it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, which brings me to perfectly Grace's question of the ICT sector, like we said earlier, is an enabler. It's not just looking at the ICT sector itself and the emissions that it has within its own place, but how does it enable the other sectors? So please, your touch point on where do you see as an enabler and how?
The way I see the ICT sector is the transformational power. Technology has been there for a long time. But what we're talking about is the smartness, is the interconnectivity, and things we're doing today we haven't been able to do unless we have this amount of devices and smartness of a cheap and efficient sensors, for example, devices that are connected and references to the internet, the ability to capture at any point of time the real-time knowledge. Knowledge is power. So technology is not only disrupting the way we work and some of the processes or use cases we automate. Technology is embedded in every element of our life, our business, our premises, our home. It is within the TV, within the elevator. So imagine the amount of data we are capturing. That's the disruption that is brought to the data capturing, to the data management, all of the power of the 5G, and data visualization. So we live in a much more transparent world where we can visualize data and make it available to different stakeholders. And then the disruption brought to the operation and to the manufacturing. We're no longer producing with the same ways the material. We're definitely being smarter in the way we are efficient, we optimize from smart transportation to smart biometrics and equipment. And nevertheless, I think the most important aspect is the interconnectivity. So the stakeholder interaction is being much more enhanced. And we've heard today lots of interconnectivity between telecommunications sector and the health sector. So I think that's the power of the ICT transformation, is that is touching on the smartness and on the connectivity. It's no longer hierarchical. So now we live in a world where there are grids, smart transportation, smart manufacturing, smart mobility, and this connectivity between human and machine wasn't existing before. So now we merge between objects and human. So like example like cyber physical systems, where we can remotely monitor all of the physical system, and there will be decision taken either by machine or by human. And imagine the amount of the preventive action that we could take, and how much we can embed KPIs. So we're monitoring at any single point of time the air pollution, the water, and the land pollution. And we course correct. So all of these optimization and efficiency that is brought to every single aspect of our life, from the use of electricity, the use of energy, and the intelligence, and that's what we mean. And as Project Management Institute, we used to talk a lot about doing the project right or doing the right project. Now we're promoting doing the smart project. We're promoting qualifying and empowering professionals and organizations to embed within their projects and within their strategy the environment, social, and governance, the DNC framework, and the SDG goals. At the end of the day, there have been a lot of investments which have failed because of the disconnect between technology and business. And more so, the disconnect between technology, business, and environment. We need to live and coexist and have a strong and meaningful connection with the nature. And this cannot be achieved without the proper devices, that's what we're doing, the cloud, and this interaction and the balance that is brought between how much we consume and produce and how much we're saving and protecting the ecosystem. And there are lots of skills. We're no longer focusing, and coming from a Project Management Institute, on the technical or industrial skills. With all respects, being an engineer myself, I felt that I will not be able in this complex world to manage unless I have a problem-solving skills, unless I have the ability to influence stakeholders, be it the regulatory, the government, the multiple vendors, for one common goal. I think the opportunity is now for everybody to focus where success looks like. Is it profitable? Is it the software or systems? I think the good news is that we're moving into a direction where people, humanity, and this coexistence, luckily, the good news is that we're giving it the right prioritization, and that's what has been brought up in COP27. And not to mention, I hope that we speak more about the food security and food safety. At the end of the day, it's about what we eat, what we drink, and what we breathe. With all the beauty and cutting edge of the technology, we need a simple and well-being life. And I also aspire and I really support and see what's going on in the Middle East and in the UAE. You see that how much there is, we're talking about the happiness index, and technology needs to bring and help us be happier, go back to being simple, more efficient, and live much more cheaper life, but with high well-being and high quality of life.
I think we also saw the value of technology, especially in COVID, where we were suddenly disconnected, but we had technology that enabled that connection to come through. So I want to take a deeper dive a little bit into ICT and putting it into perspective. And we'll start with you, Stelios, looking at how in times of an emergency, you guys were able to create and activate value-add instant networks. Can you just deep dive a little bit there?
No, thanks. As I mentioned earlier, I touched on the environment, but now I think I want to link a bit more to the social.
Yes, please.
So one of the great initiatives that we have within the Vodafone family is this instant network capability. So in times of crisis, when a cyclone has hit, a hurricane, and there are people around the world, fellow human beings, suffering, we have dedicated professionals who are trained, who with 3 bags get on the next flight out, set up a network and get people connected again until normal services are resumed. And I think that's one of the great things of ensuring quality of life is there, getting people to reach out to their loved ones and so on. On the same vein, there's another great initiative that we do, which is called instant schooling, okay? It was done, I saw it when I lived in Hungary previous to Oman, where we would go to some of the more impoverished parts of the country, ensure that they are connected, give access to the children there to learn from the internet, but give them the iPads, things they did not have. And that would help them continue to grow and not be at a different pace to everybody else. So, and then when I link back to some of the things we've heard about today and earlier on, which is about analytics, data science, our industry has a lot of touch points, a lot of data. By getting these capabilities and getting the youth that's coming out of university and enabling to become the data scientists and the developers of the future, again, for me, that is sustainability. That's our part to really help us live a much better future and do things right. So I think these are wonderful things where our industry is helping and is doing a lot, and for sure, there's a lot more we can do.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
And then Philip, off to you. I want to, from a different perspective, to look at the power of 5G. So we are looking at the full potential of this new technology that can be across sectors, used in many different ways. So a deep dive from your end, please.
I think you'll start thinking that I have a fetish for the number 3, but I'll have to read it.
It's a good number.
The first thing is the power of the technology itself, which is, and again, Stelios will keep me very honest here. The number of data that you can provide, the data points that you can provide in 4G versus 3G and in 5G versus 4G is exponential.
Correct.
So essentially, each person, when consuming, when using the stuff, is accumulating more and more. That creates, if you manage to bring 5G, that creates massive efficiencies because it costs you less to transport. People can consume more with the same amount. If you take one of the technologies they have in Oman, for instance, massive MIMO is, if I remember well, 15 times more effective than the previous technology. Yeah. So that's the first thing, which is the power of the technology itself is fantastic. And I usually like to summarize it into, and again, keep me honest here, which is, if you take this on a piece of paper, 3G would be probably something like, 10 meters accurate versus 1 meter for 4G versus probably 10, 20 centimeters cubic for 5G. So there is a massive change in the type of precision you can have with the same data. The second point is one of the things we realized just after doing the Oman project, building on that, when we were doing the project in Ethiopia, is that we have all been developing networks on a linear way on saying, okay, you do 2G, then 3G, then 4G, then 5G. But then you realize during COVID that if you don't have the connected fiber optics between the towers, if you don't have the 4G or the 5G, a lot of the services actually don't work that well. So if you really want to do SDG, if you really want to go green, you need to build a network the other way around. You need to start with 4G, 5G, and then connect the rest. If you can, you need to add the low orbit satellites on top just to make sure that you have fantastic coverage everywhere. The key point is there is a massive realization, I think, in the industry that the way we design our own business models somehow blocks us from helping. So when we designed Ethiopia, for instance, we started and wrote in the bylaws of the company that it would be an SDG company. So the management team is incentivized not only on the fact of delivering a network and services, but on the fact of delivering services that actually improve society. And I'll build on the third point, which would be building on the school in a box that we have. We brought one of those into Ethiopia when we were doing it, and the first reaction from the government was, "Can you bring this to every single school?" And then we looked at, why do you want that? And then they said, because the problem is hardware, not connectivity alone. So we need a solution that encompasses everything. So we have a dedicated team, for instance, in that country, because that need has been identified, that is looking not at, a lot of companies will do a pilot with 3 schools, 15 schools, 200 schools. Well, we're looking at 36,000 schools because that's the need. It doesn't mean we're going to solve it in one go, but I circle back to the point of what I made the previous time, which is if you look at what the country really, really needs, then you will be able to master certain solutions. And then it's not about, as you said, about going for, a solution that will exist in 15 years. There is plenty of stuff that exists that we can just bring, but we don't because we try to do everything. So focus, 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 exactly like 5G, be more specific, be more accurate. I finish on an example that I find fascinating, which is, does anybody in this room know what's the main reason you have so many robots in a factory? It's the wiring. The wiring cannot be curved that much, and therefore the robots can't move that much. If you have a low latency 5G, you don't need cables no more. And so the reduction we obtain in factories in Germany, for instance, goes up to 80% of the capex on the robots goes down. So obviously for the factory, if you can bring this 5G low latency there, and you can bring these smart robots, then the saving is gigantic. And again, you're not consuming 80% of the robots, so you're not polluting on 80% of the robots, et cetera, et cetera. So go specific, go very practical.
I don't want to give the impression that ICT is the sole solution to the sustainability problem. It's one of the solutions. But I also want to highlight that government has a role to play in this equation. Yeah. So, Dr. Linda, if you can just kind of go into, we don't need to deep dive very much, but understanding the role of government in driving sustainability within the ICT sector. Where can they help? Sure. How do they hinder?
Sure. Actually, the fight against climate change is a marathon. If we don't know how to sprint, we will not we will not win the marathon. This is what I wanted to start with. Well, the government role, how I see it, here it's in four pillars. Number 1, it's laws and regulations. Number 2 is infrastructure. Number 3 is investment and financing. And number 4 is monitoring and surveillance. If we look at the rules and regulations, we saw that most of the governments are committed after the climate change summit. So the commitment to net zero emissions and all this stuff, this has to be taken into consideration. To take it into consideration, this has to be reflected in the strategies, where the government set the strategies and the private sector implements those strategies. And it should be government-driven instead of being industry-driven. And that's why we see that most of the Gulf governments are following those steps through clear strategies that took into consideration the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are implementing this across all sectors, and among them is the ICT sector. If we look at the finance, they should improve and support the energy efficiency. This is regarding the infrastructure. And on the finance side, governments can introduce incentives for the use of eco-friendly solutions and systems. Besides, they can impose like in the tax system, they can provide rules and regulations that contribute to this.
And I think with COP, we also saw the reverse happening. So everybody put the burden of sustainability on governments. But at COP27, we saw that, you know what, private sector has a role to play, like you rightly said. They are the implementers of whatever the strategies are that are coming in from government. So it is a partnership between the two.
Yes,
and as much as I would love to deep dive even further, we had a cutoff that was at 4:30. So unfortunately, we need to close off. But I would like to put a final kind of touch point on all the things that were said today, is to say that sustainability is very much a systemic issue. Meaning it is not one sector, it is not one player, it is not one government. It is a play that requires multiple players. We're all learning as we go. This is not something that we have been playing around with for a very long time. Sustainability has been around for more than 20 years, but I think the action for sustainability is now, because we felt the impact of climate change a lot more severely now. And what this is calling for is an alliance. There needs to be an understanding that you cannot have any action move forward if you don't have multiple players coming together across sectors and across players. Absolutely. Thank you all very much. It has been an absolute pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much for your time. Pleasure to have you guys here with us today.
Thank you.